Thank you very much. And for me, it's great honor to be here. I'm presenting the EU strategy for the Baltic Sea region, and I'm lucky in the way that I can really tie into the two previous presentations, because I think they both very much emphasize the importance of a more coherent approach to cooperation, projects, implementation, and policy, and towards the research community. And that is very much also what we try to achieve in the EU strategy for the Baltic Sea region. I'm going to start with a little bit of a brief introduction to the strategy for those of you who are not been so familiar with it. Then I'm going to talk about the strategy after 2 years, where we are right now, and the very exciting process that we're in concerning the establishment of clearer targets, and what other kind of recommendations that we are trying to implement to speed up and be even more efficient in the future with working with the strategy. Then looking ahead towards the future, and a little bit about the future of cohesion policy, 2014 to 2020. So, the EU strategy for the Baltic Sea region is the first macro-regional strategy developed in Europe. It's a concept that is very novel to the EU sort of way of working. It was adopted in the Baltic Sea region in 2009 during the Swedish EU presidency, and it has sort of been developed towards that for the 2 previous years. We have now been followed by a Danube strategy, approved last year during the Hungarian presidency. But these are the 2 only strategies in existence so far. So it's a concept that is very much still in the pilot phase, and we're trying to evaluate and really secure that we get an added value out of this way of working. There are other regions, macro regions, that are interested in doing the same thing, but so far this is confined to those 2 areas. And the reason for the strategy was very much reflecting, I mean, the discussion leading up to the strategy was very much similar to what we have heard for the research discussion, and also what Helcom was talking about. I mean, the need for a more coherent approach, the need to really link projects to policy development, the need to make sure that the many initiatives taken around the Baltic region really adds up to a greater whole. It was a tendency in the Baltic, even though there's a lot of really committed people, a lot of people and organizations working hard with the development of the region, it was felt that we didn't get really the impact that we needed. It was sort of suboptimal. The results were not really as great as they could have been. And it was felt that a greater coordination was needed if we are really going to reach the very ambitious goals that we have set for the region. So this is sort of the more theoretical base of the strategy, why the strategy came about. The strategy has developed 15 priority areas. This was done through a very extensive stakeholder consultation process, where most of the stakeholder community had the chance to contribute with ideas and priorities, what the strategy should be about. And we ended up with 15 priority areas, 4 of them being very close to or identical to what goes on within Helcom: fighting eutrophication, preserving biodiversity, reducing the input of hazardous substances, clean shipping. We also have included how to mitigate the climate change effects as another environmentally based cooperation area. We have 4 areas dealing with more economic cooperation, implementing the internal market in the Baltic region, also dealing with customs towards third countries like Russia, dealing with agriculture, but also based on accessibility, making sure that the energy market is connected and also more sort of sustainable. We are also working with accessibility of transport, also ensuring that it's sustainable for the future. as well as looking at safety and security issues, looking at the reducing the number of ship accidents, and also increasing the response capacity for any kind of accidents happening on the Baltic Sea. So this is just broadly to show that it's a very broad strategy. It includes most of the topics that you could imagine. But that's also, I think, a strength of the strategy. It really does take this holistic and complete view of how the strategy, how the region should develop. We have about 80 flagship projects that we see as pilot projects. They are sort of pointing the way towards where we want to go. They give examples of what we want to achieve. And of course, they provide policy recommendations that we then take up to the policy level for discussions. So very much compared to also what HELCOM is trying to do. And as I said, there's a broad ownership of the strategy. It was adopted and consulted widely. So where are we after 2 years? Well, we can see that there has been considerable progress. There are new targeted and more inclusive projects. Areas where there were little activities before, there has been, like in accident response, there has been an increase of the number of projects. Dealing with areas that were maybe more difficult to tackle before are now sort of tackled in a better way. And so on. We have worked to make sure that the priorities identified in the strategy are also matched with funding opportunities, so that we have a better match between the different programs, because there is a lot of programs. Bonus is of course a very important one, but there is only in structural funds we have calculated there are about 50 billion euros being spent in the region. So of course, if we can at least make sure that some of those are better aligned with the sort of greater challenges perceived in the region, we have achieved a lot. Because I would say that if it's a great challenge in the research field, that a lot of things is diverse and going into many different areas, we have definitely the same within regional policy, where sometimes even two roads can connect to the same border in different geographical locations. Well, I'm just caricaturing a bit, but I mean, without coordination, is a great risk that we're duplicating and missing a lot of opportunities. So better alignment of funding is really a key issue that we're working with. And there we have, of course, have an advantage in the fact that this is coordinated from the regional policy, which in the end has the greatest budget available to the region. Greater policy coherence, that is very much also reflecting what Ann-Christine was saying, the need really to make sure that results coming from different type of projects are also fed into the policy debate. And also that the relevant ministries, the relevant ministers are discussing the issues and topics that comes out of our joint cooperation. I think we do see a gap today that many of the great results coming out of projects are not taken up at policy level in the way it should be. Well, of course, not everything is a success. We still have to work more with the alignment of funding and also with policy. As I said, there are still major gaps. It is also important to maintain a political momentum. I hope there are not too many politicians in the room, but I must say that there is a tendency sometimes that you launch things like this from the political level and then you move on to other topics. But of course, if this is to be a success, we have to have a continuous political interest, a continuous political support for this, because many of the issues are, of course, very complicated, and it requires tough political decisions. So we really do need the politicians to be around, not just at the launching of things, but actually also at the follow-up, the implementation, the monitoring, and so on. And of course, we do have in the strategy a need to be better at monitoring what we do, evaluating what we do, and also communicating on what we do. So we have a process ongoing right now to develop targets and indicators on how to follow the strategy in a better way. And this goes on both at the strategy overall level and at the, as I pointed out, the 15 priority area level. But it's difficult, as all of you know who has been involved in developing indicators. It is not an easy job, and it's not something that is done very quickly. So we were continuously working with this. Just to formalize all these changes, the Commission will issue a communication in the beginning of next year during the Danish presidency, where we sort of formalize the changes coming out of this process of sort of reviewing the strategy, looking at what could be done better, and also, of course, then including the new targets, hopefully then developed. As I said, alignment of funding is a big part of what we do. And here we really try to look broad. We're trying to look beyond what we do every day in the Regional Policy Directorate. We're also looking at the European Fisheries Fund. We're looking at the agricultural support, the European Social Fund. And we do try to keep a dialogue open with the funding that are not really regionalized or national. I mean, the research funding, for instance, the funding for educational cooperation, funding for support to SMEs and so on, to make sure that even if their focus is Europe-wide, EU27-wide, that they do, and the bonus is an excellent example of this, that they do also look at regional specificities, and if there is any kind of chance of maybe adopting some of the schemes that comes as a result of EU27 discussions onto a macro-regional cooperation like this. And again, we always point to the bonus being a very good example of things like that. So recommendations that we are working on right now. Of course, we need to make sure that we link our work to the overall EU strategies, and now, of course, it's EU 2020 as the main strategy at the moment. We will work harder to make sure that the strategy and the results coming out of the strategy is dealt with at the policy level by also not just by the cooperation, the ministers of European affairs discussing it, but also the Minister of Transport, the Ministers of Environment, the Ministers for Defense, the Ministers for Research and so on. So as this is not just seen as a cooperation process, but it's also seen as a process where different topics are discussed by the relevant ministers. Of course, targets I already mentioned, and there, of course, we would really appreciate your assistance on this. And also maximum efforts to align funding with the strategy objectives. This is a very important part. And now, of course, we are going into the next programming period, the next 7-year funding period for the European Union. And here we have a much greater chance to actually already from the start make sure that the programs are better addressing the strategy needs. We need to strengthen the implementation structures. I pointed to that we have 15 priority areas. In each of those priority areas, there's a coordinator, there is country representatives around that coordinator, making sure that what happens in each area goes along with the overall structure, the overall direction of the strategy. Here, of course, we can't run on air. We do need to make sure that these are funded and staffed in a proper way. And then, of course, we need to communicate better. We need to reach the different stakeholders, communities, but also to reach the broader public. I think this is basically covered. And this as well. I just want to, of course, as you already are in Gdansk, but we have the first or the second annual forum, but the first sort of proper one together with the Baltic Development Forum going on just some meters away from here. And this is a great chance to really get stakeholder input. We're expecting some 700 people. So it's a major event for us and a major chance to take stock and really to develop an even better and more focused strategy for the future. Thank you.
Thank you.